students this. One of the next kind of section I'd like to talk to you a little bit is when you're writing materials. Part of this is informed on, obviously, my own experience of writing a lot of bilingual materials. This is actually my third book, and I've learned a lot by doing this. You know, when we did the first book, and just a little bit trial and error. I mean, there's really no research out there to tell what balance you should use. So we did an awful lot of piloting on this, an awful lot of piloting to see what works and what doesn't work. If you were to pick any unit, you know, basically the way this book works is you've got the first two pages. First page of any unit will be the objectives. And if you can, for example, if you go to page, just pick a book here, might as well go to Unit 1. Page 8, yeah, first page of Unit 1. You've got some objectives there that tell students, those are called behavioral objectives. This is one thing that makes, well, I think this book different. I think anytime you make materials, I would highly recommend that you really think about topics like food and travel. Because food, I mean, there are so many ways you can talk about food. You can talk about recipes, you can give opinions, you can have a food fight. I mean, there's all kinds of things you can do with food. You know, so you need to keep it behavioral, which usually means functional. Like, what are they going to be able to do with the food? You know, they're going to be able to, for example, make choices in a restaurant or something like that. Students, as Noonan and everyone else has pointed out a billion times, need to understand what they're doing, which is why the first thing you learn in your teacher training courses is to write up, which I of course didn't do today. You're supposed to write up on the board, every class, this is what we're doing today, so students know. With behavioral objectives, often the objectives are more difficult sometimes to understand, or they contain language that hasn't been taught yet. So again, if they're low-level students, you got to ask yourself, do they need some L1 support, some Japanese support? If you go to the last page, page 15, those objectives are now teased out. These are the assessment goals. Now in your handouts on page 4, I put them side by side. The objectives, the first objective is basically just what am I going to be doing? But it's too general to be an assessment criteria. You need to break it down so students can see, you know, the sub-skills, the sub-functions of what they're doing. My question to you would be, what level would you use English or would you use Japanese? For this gentleman here, I think you're an English-only guy. How can you ensure that your students, I'm not trying to like challenge you, I'm just asking, like, what do you do to make sure that they know that not just the topic, but what they're expected to do with it?
And maybe I repeat the ideas or the expressions several times.
Yeah. And they're written out?
That would be orally, or then to supplement that, then I might give them a printed out explanation.
Yeah, I think that's very helpful. If you've got a motivated class, I mean, they can use a dictionary, they can figure it out.
This is the assumption that they can read better than they can hear.
Yeah, which is usually the case.
What's your take on students actually not understanding and keep on going? Like, for me in my class, I'm not so worried whether the students understand or not. Frankly, I've been learning English and I'm learning Japanese now. In my Japanese class, honestly speaking, sometimes I understood like 30%. I was quite satisfied with that.
Yeah.
And I think my students are going through the same thing. What's your difference?
That's a big question. That gets into tolerance of ambiguity. You know, how much are you willing to not understand as a learner?
I think the use of the L1 really, I agree with your argument, but in a sense, you're sort of not helping the students develop tolerance of ambiguity by using the L1.
Yes and no. I think that overuse of the L1 certainly doesn't do them any favors. But again, you need to pick your battles. If you look at, you know, how the teacher uses Japanese, how much is in materials, and how much students use it. My argument, and my biggest argument in this whole thing, is use bilingual materials to do all the Japanese support so that you don't have to use it in class so much. You don't really have to speak Japanese. If everything they need to understand is right there, you can just go on knowing fully that even the lowest level students know what they're supposed to do and they have access to the information. But in terms of, okay, I got a good one. We had a teacher named Brad, it's an American fellow, and he was a very English-only kind of guy. And we used to argue about this like crazy. Now, Brad had been in Japan about 4 years, and I think he could probably order a glass of water in a restaurant. That was about as far as Brad's Japanese. But he was adamant. No, students, it's up to them to understand. I refuse to use Japanese in class. It's not good for their learning, blah, blah, blah. So Josai, my university, offered free classes for the foreign teachers who wanted it. Now, they chose a teacher who would do it, and it turns out she didn't speak any English. She really didn't speak English, but she was going to give her time to teach Japanese. And at the table, Brad was the first guy, within about 3 minutes, like throwing his things down, going, I don't get this. Well, what does this mean? Like, completely turning to English. And so later I said, yeah, I heard about your class, Brad. I mean, I hear that you use a lot of English. Well, it's because she didn't help us with English. Why can't you get it? And he's still, no, but in my class, I refuse to use Japanese, or let them use Japanese. So in spite of this incredibly frustrating and unproductive experience he had, I would argue that the person to ask is your student. Just ask them, how much they want to give. And often by doing things like that last page, needs analysis, what you're doing is sensitizing them to just what it means to use L1 as a support. How are they using their own language, which is instructive. And arguably, that kind of meta-linguistic talk, you're not going to be able to have those discussions in English. That kind of real ideology level stuff has to pretty much be done in their language. Well, why did you do that? What was the reason why you chose this instead of this? Why did you feel you had to do this when we've already learned in class? Why didn't you just take a chance with it? Next time, try this. And then you encourage them to gradually break away, so that when they're using the L1, they're doing it in a very productive way that reflects the way the good language learners do. But yeah, I think you have to ask them, because your tolerance of ambiguity would be different than theirs. All right? Fair enough? Anyone else? Okay. Yeah.
What do you think about like the detailed objectives versus general objectives? If I give a very kind of very basic general statement about what the class is going to be about, the students can usually have some foggy idea of what the class is about, and then through each step know what they should do in each step. But if it's all explained in detail in Japanese and they have a whole image of the class, but then they don't necessarily need to listen so closely to each step along the way, because they can just sort of figure out what's going on.
Yeah.
So that's kind of another element. I just wondered what you thought about how much they need to know at the beginning of the class.
I think that reflects, is it Jeremy?
Jeremy.
Jeremy. I think that reflects what Jeremy's saying, is that, and I agree with you. I mean, the thing you don't want to do is make sure you have to understand every single word. Because as I'm talking here, people will be thinking, oh man, I shouldn't have had so much beer last night, or well, who knows, I got to pay my phone bill. People are going to be drifting in and out anyway. Even native speakers don't pick up every word. We just select what we want to hear. So it's unrealistic to expect your students to understand. That's part of this, getting them to tune in on what they need. So yeah, I wouldn't stress out about it too much. But when it comes to objectives, the initial objectives, like you said, if you just give them enough so that they know what they have to do. And sometimes that could just, like for example, giving them the thing about, calling a friend and asking them out. You can say, in this class, and you can do it, say, okay, bring, hi, it's Mike. Do you want to go for ramen? Blah, 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 and have that mini conversation. And say, that is today's